Thank you for joining us today. My name is Shravya Chandramouli, and I'm a postdoc research fellow on the Planetary AI project at the University of Edinburgh in the UK. The Planetary AI project explores the global production networks of AI, specifically paying attention to the human labor and the material infrastructures that sustain it. And besides undertaking research on these themes as part of the project, we're also interested in building broader capacities for critical engagement in AI research and practice. And so, for instance, as part of that, we run a reading group that's called Critical Prompts, and we meet fortnightly, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat in a bit. And along within that similar spirit of building a broader critical capacity in how we engage with AI, is how we've convened the AI Future seminar series, which is an effort to discuss the radical ways in which we might reimagine organizing our economies and societies in the future and thinking critically about the role that AI plays within that. And today we're delighted to host Sebastián Lehuedé, who will be speaking on the topic of sustainability, AI, and environmental justice, drawing on his recent research in Colombia. By way of introduction, Sebastian is a lecturer in ethics, AI, and society at the Department of Digital Humanities at King's College London in the UK. Sebastian's research focuses on the governance of digital technologies from a global social justice perspective. His current research, called a research project, which is called AI's Nature, explores the connection between artificial intelligence and environmental justice. And we'll be hearing about this work in today's talk. Sebastian's approach combines ethnographic methods, political ecology, and decolonial thought. And he's also contributed to conceptual development on data friction, digital sovereignty, and reflexivity in critical data studies. Sebastian is an important critical voice in examining environmental politics of AI from a social justice perspective, and we're very happy to hear about his work today in this seminar. So Sebastian will speak for about 30 minutes, followed by which we will have Q&A. And you're very welcome to add questions in the chat as we go along or raise them at the end of the talk. And with that, I will pass it on to Sebastian, and we're very excited to hear about your research today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that very nice introduction. Thank you, Shravya and Beatrice and Amir, and congratulations on the project that you are undertaking, such an important and relevant topic, bringing together so many things that I guess makes it quite challenging, but I think it's a very important task to actually do. So I'm going to be presenting today about my fieldwork in Colombia, analyzing AI for sustainability initiatives. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and then yes. Okay. So the title of my talk today is Beyond Hubris, In Situ AI and Peasant Struggles in Colombia. The content of this talk is part of a wider book project where I examine the political ecology of AI with a focus on Latin America. I will describe briefly my previous research as well in one of the slides. But let me begin with an anecdote. Last year, I took this video while traveling to Sumapaz National Park in Colombia at over 3,000 meters above sea level. On the jeep, I was discussing with Ivan, a scientist using AI for plant conservation, how the environmental challenges in the area are deeply tied to socio-political conflicts in Colombia. As Ivan explained, the peace agreement had introduced new forms of ecological conflict. In Sumapaz, for example, peasants had been opposing stricter environmental regulations, which they believed threatened their livelihoods. What struck me about our conversation was Ivan's ambiguity regarding these ecological conflicts. To a great extent, this ambiguity arose from his experience working closely with local peasants. He was unsure what to think about these conflicts, yet he hoped that this proximity to local peasants would help him and his team acknowledge, rather than ignore, local ecological struggles. Ivan's reflexivity contrasts with the dominant approach in AI for sustainability initiatives, where techno-utopian and technocratic visions are more prevalent. I will discuss Ivan's project in depth later, but before that, let me introduce how AI for sustainability has been approached in the public debate and academia. And in this, a blog post by Sam Altman can be a good starting point. In 2024, Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, wrote in his blog that fixing the climate will be one of the outstanding triumphs achieved in what he calls the intelligence age. Under this vision, the most sensible path forward in the climate crisis will be to simply support more and better AI, which at some point will figure out how to solve the problem. In this climate techno-utopia, the potential environmental costs of AI growth are seen as a price worth paying for developing superintelligent machines capable of addressing the climate crisis. While far-fetched, Altman's vision is part of broader efforts by big tech companies to highlight the ecological benefits of AI. In recent years, companies such as Microsoft, Google, and Huawei have issued reports, joined climate forums such as COP meetings, and partnered with governments and international organizations to promote AI for sustainability. In their view, AI's capacity to identify patterns and predict phenomena offers unique opportunities for climate and environmental action. Climate modeling, energy efficiency, and conservation can all benefit from AI applications. While articulating a more scientific approach than Altman's, big tech's vision still conveys the same message. AI is good for the environment and climate action. Yet, this vision has become increasingly criticized in public debate in light of the growing awareness over AI's environmental costs. At the forefront of this criticism are the growing environmental impacts of data centers. Resistance to data centers has gained momentum in recent years, primarily due to the considerable amount of water and energy they require to train and run AI models. According to Data Center Watch, up to $150 billion in investments have been were paralyzed in the US last year due to local opposition. However, data centers are only the tip of the iceberg. More broadly, AI relies on a problematic and extractive value chain, including mining, refinement, electronic manufacturing, and waste, all of which affect Global South regions, with those regions capturing very little value from the AI industry. In my research, I have focused on the ecological struggles of local communities participating in the value chain of AI. One of the cases I looked at is depicted in the background of these slides, with residents from Santiago, Chile, who managed to stall the construction of a Google data center in 2022. Another case I looked at involved indigenous communities in the Atacama Desert affected by lithium extraction. Through this research, I have shown the rich and unique ecological and technological visions held by these groups, and reflected on how such visions can be incorporated in AI development and governance. When considering AI's value chain, sustainability initiatives using AI have tended to be interpreted as greenwashing, as an excuse to exaggerate AI's ecological potential, downplay its costs, and shape regulation and adoption based on corporate visions and interests. While relevant, the greenwashing critique should not keep us from examining the ecological politics of AI for sustainability initiatives. Thanks to research in this field, we have learned more about the problematic ecological vision underpinning AI and the digital industry more broadly. Big tech companies, it has been shown, deploy environmental initiatives to situate themselves as legitimate custodians of nature and spread their problematic high-tech form of future making. Furthermore, AI is not only used for environmental purposes, but also for highly polluting goals, contributing to the acceleration of oil and mineral extraction across the planet. AI for sustainability can involve problematic ways of approaching and misusing data, and can end up concentrating environmental action rather than democratizing it across actors in the world. A form of technological determinism presents AI as the only way forward, obscuring futures with alternative technologies, smaller scale technologies, or even no technology at all. What all of this means is that even if the value chain of AI were to magically become sustainable and not extractive, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon, we will still need to interrogate the use of AI for environmental purposes. As of today, most studies have failed to engage with specific context to understand how AI for sustainability initiatives materialize in practice. As I will show, we can observe that AI for sustainability is not only in the hands of big tech, but also among a wide range of actors, including scientists and local communities, using it to address local ecological struggles. This acknowledgement drives the questions I will explore in this talk. So these questions are what ecological orientations underpin AI for sustainability initiatives, and how do these orientations deal, negotiate, or navigate local ecological contexts? But what do I mean by ecological orientations, and why do local ecological context matters? To understand this, we need to look at a vibrant field of thought and praxis combining political ecology, science and technology studies, and feminist and decolonial thought. In the last few decades, a deep critique has emerged of what has usually been understood as environmentalism. Despite their good intentions, environmentalist initiatives can nonetheless reproduce the problematic ecological vision that is at the core of the current environmental crisis. In this vision, which emerged in European modernity, humans and nature are conceived as inherently separate and hierarchically unequal entities. While humans are active agents, nature represents something akin to an inert background. In many cases, environmentalism has failed to fully challenge the human-nature binary. This is particularly the case when initiatives seek to save nature from humans, which is still present not only in environmentalism, but also even in biology and conservation sciences to some degrees. Another concern is modern environmentalism. In modern environmentalism is the persistent idea that ecological concerns are primarily a preoccupation of wealthier groups and global north populations, who can afford such concerns after achieving a certain degree of material well-being. Indigenous knowledges are either ignored or only acknowledged as relevant to the local context rather than universal in the way modern sciences are supposed to be. Opposing this idea, authors such as Colombian anthropologist Arturo Escobar have theorized on the importance of local ways of engaging with nature. In fact, the current environmental crisis stems to a great extent from the imposition of a single ecological vision at the expense of the flourishing of diverse human-nature relations. Colombia is a particularly relevant case for exploring the intersections of environmentalism, conservation science, environmental justice, and AI. Colombia is one of the world's most biodiverse countries, hosting a rich variety of plants, animals, and other natural entities that have made, and continue to make, planet Earth habitable for humans. 43% of Colombia's territory corresponds to the Amazon rainforest. These AI initiatives, it is not coincidence then that Colombia currently hosts several AI for sustainability initiatives, some led by big tech companies, others by the government, and others even by the military. These AI initiatives are unfolding amid environmental conflict with deep sociopolitical roots, entangled with the country's history of political violence. Before the peace agreements of the last decade, some guerrilla groups practiced a form of gunpoint conservation, which to some extent kept deforestation in check. When this group demobilized, deforestation rates increased in some areas, though the opposite occurred in others. In recent years, deforesters and local communities have become targets of operations conducted by the Colombian military, particularly between 2019 and 2022. This phenomenon has been described in research as green militarization, supported by global north countries and especially the US. In a historic turn, Gustavo Petro, a former guerrilla member, became Colombia's first left-wing president in 2022. Petro has advanced a different vision of sustainability, promoting dialogue with dissident guerrilla groups and local communities. His first 2 years in office saw record lows in deforestation rates. More recently, however, some of these groups have publicly called for deforestation to resume as peace talks have stalled. A project by Microsoft gives us an idea of the type of initiatives taking place in Colombia. Let me show you a video to introduce it before I bring to the fore what I consider to be a relevant limitation of projects of this kind. Well, the video is available on YouTube, so if you're interested, you can see a complete version, but I think you can get an idea more or less with what I have already shown. A guacamaya is a colorful parrot native to tropical regions of Central and South America. Guacamaya is also the name of this partnership between Microsoft's AI for Good division, satellite imaging company Planet, and government and academic groups from Colombia. Launched in 2022, the project's main goal is to develop AI tools to combat deforestation in the Amazon. According to available information, one of the objectives is to create a multimodal language model, a ChatGPT-like tool capable of processing different types of data, including satellite images, bioacoustic data, and audiovisual data. Another goal is to accelerate the identification of deforestation hotspots for research and policy purposes. One of the promises of Guacamaya, which is shared by many AI initiatives, is the identification of patterns. So let me read a quote from material available. So how does anyone tackle a problem so large and complex as trying to reverse deforestation on a major scale? Enter AI. Thanks to the power of data, machine learning, cloud technology, data science, and applied analytics, experts are developing innovative, collaborative programs that will make recognizing deforestation patterns easier and provide tools for policymakers to use in creating action plans that could stop deforestation in its tracks. But what type of patterns are we talking about here? Even though there is little concrete information available, I did find one particular example of how these patterns or what kind of patterns are being identified and how are they being expected to be used. So let me read again from material available. One telltale signal that deforestation or mining is about to occur is the presence of unauthorized roads. If those are spotted in satellite imagery, authorities can be alerted to the activity. So on the surface, it sounds simple. Detect a road, alert the authorities, and solve the problem. If you've ever been in the UK, I don't know if this also applies to Scotland, this sounds pretty much like see it, say it, sort it. In reality, however, road building is more complicated. A passage from research by Acero and Thompson illustrates how road detection often leads to criminalization of rural populations. As they say, environmental norms have declared community-built roads illegal. If the state invested in rural areas, people would not have to provide their own infrastructure in the first place. To add insult to injury, foreign oil companies regularly fell trees and build roads, with and without the appropriate environmental permits, which are beyond the reach of many locals. As explained so succinctly by Maria, everything peasants do is illegal. So in this case, the pursuit of seemingly legitimate global ecological imperatives, such as emissions capture, enters into conflict with local ecological politics, potentially expanding an approach to environmental action that peasants in the Amazon resist. The lack of clarity in Guacamaya documentation on how exactly it will deal with local ecological context speaks to a wider debate taking place in the environmental humanities, and more specifically in relation to the notion of hubris. Hubris is linked to the ideas of arrogance and overconfidence. It has its origins in Greek mythology when Icarus acquired artificial wings and, despite being advised not to, flew so high that the wings melted. Icarus' story is fundamental to what Duke Huey called Western cosmotechnics, driving the dominant visions of how technology and everything that exists are connected. In recent years, hubris has come to the fore as a philosophical question, raising the issue of whether an excessive faith in technology can prevent us from solving the environmental crisis. Colombian decolonial thinker Sergio Castro Gomez has also connected hubris to modernity and coloniality. In his view, hubris refers to a standpoint that privileges detachment from concrete experiences, a way of observing from above. This detachment, as modernity discourse has it, is the source of neutrality and objectivity. From a decolonial perspective, hubris justified empires in believing they knew better than local population what was good or bad for them, imposing allegedly universal visions on local context. I am bringing to the fore the notion of hubris to highlight what I consider to be a potential limitation of AI for sustainability projects. The lack of capacity to align the pursuit of ambitious ecological imperatives, such as emission reductions that I mentioned earlier, with a concern for local ecological contexts and struggles. However, hubris is not the only option we can find in AI initiatives with an ecological orientation. Let me turn to another AI initiative, although approaching sustainability from a different scale and with different logics and purposes. These initiatives, which I briefly mentioned at the beginning of the talk, is taking place hundreds of kilometers west of the Amazon, where we find páramos. Páramos are high-altitude tropical ecosystems that are key to water regulations across the country, including the Amazon itself. The Common Garden Project is a scientific peasant collaboration focused on the conservation of the frailejón plant. The frailejón is crucial for water regulation across Colombia, including the Amazon, as it can transform humidity into liquid water. The project aims to identify how many subspecies of frailejón exist and their characteristics such as height and number of leaves. This project adopts an in situ approach to conservation, where initiatives take place in the plant's natural environment rather than in distant locations such as botanical gardens. I will return to this point later as I find it a crucial inspiration for rethinking what we mean by AI for sustainability. For this, the project is setting up an AI system to assist in the process. Photos taken by peasants under strict protocols will be used by AI to automatically identify and measure changes, as well as propose subcategories of frailejón. The project originated from a Colombian biologist based at the Missouri Botanical Gardens in the US, who has collaborated for years with local peasants in activities such as seed collection. However, the Common Garden represents a new step in this collaboration, as the greenhouse for the project is located in the garden of a peasant family. This is how the greenhouse looks like. I visited this project last year and conducted 4 interviews with a biologist, a computer scientist, and 2 peasants involved in the project. I am aware, I am consciously using the word peasant here, although I am aware that it has a negative connotation in English. It is the closest translation to campesino in Spanish, and I think there is work to be done to reclaim it as a term of agency, much like other historically marginalized identities have been reclaimed. I'm happy to discuss this later, but this is something that usually comes up in the Q&As when I talk about this topic. So initially, my focus on this project revolved around the idea of participatory AI, to what extent this peasant scientific collaboration could be labeled as such, and what could be learned from the experience. However, a field visit to this initiative last year made me realize that participation was not the right term to describe what I was observing. During this visit, I observed a data collection session involving a student and a peasant. This process required placing a frailejón plant on a rotating tray so the camera could take photos from different angles. Equipment was used to ensure all photos were taken from the same height and angle. Strict protocols were required. While the peasant was responsible for following and managing them, on this occasion he admitted to the student that he had forgotten them. Another issue arose when I asked the peasant what the data collection was about. After struggling to explain, he said the idea was to store the photos in the camera so people could study them later. This revealed that the peasant had little awareness of the technical infrastructure or the use of AI in the project at all. Situations like these are common in participatory AI projects. While scientists and academics aim to involve diverse groups, the knowledges and engagement with natures from this group might not be the same as the scientists, or local communities might simply not share the same priorities as the researchers. Besides this so-called lack of meaningful participation, something that caught my attention was the proximity between scientists and peasants. Since the project is taking place in rural in a rural isolated area, there are no nearby hotels. As a result, collaborators stay in the house of a peasant family, sharing a roof for days or even weeks. Grocery shopping and meals are also done collaboratively, with all participants contributing to decisions about what to eat and sharing meals throughout the day. This project, therefore, was taking place in the context of ambient sharing, with close proximity between all of those involved. While this might seem anecdotal, it is key to understanding what I find to be unique about this project. This proximity has allowed collaborators, including biologists and computer scientists, to better understand the ecological conflicts and struggles of the area. For decades, the ecosystem, the Páramo, was relatively safe due to the presence of armed groups. This might sound counterintuitive, but this group practiced a form of what I introduced earlier as gunpoint conservation, protecting the local flora as it helped them hide. With the peace treaties in Colombia, these groups left the area, exposing it to environmentally harmful forms of farming, tourism, and extraction. In response, the government introduced new environmental regulations. The Frailejón has been at the center of these regulations due to its key role in water regulation. However, peasants have opposed these new rules as they consider that the rules threaten their subsistence farming. As scientists involved in these projects explained to me, they don't consider themselves to have a strong stance on this ecological controversy. Nevertheless, the project has been key in sensitizing them to these issues. As the leading biologist of the project explained to me, the common garden is a way to start thinking and talking about a problem that, let's say, perhaps is imposed on them, on the peasants. I don't know, about conservation, and to begin discussing it in a way and interacting with people who are deeply immersed in that problem without any kind of imposition. I particularly like the idea of immersion at the heart of this project. Rather than assuming the role of experts who could teach peasants, the scientists involved expect that as they develop the AI system, they will become more familiar with the local context and environmental struggles. This seems to me like a significant departure from most AI for sustainability projects. Now, to interpret what is unique about this project, let me return to the notion of in situ conservation I introduced earlier. In ex situ initiatives, conservation takes place in controlled environments, such as fortresses or fortresses-like environments, with the goal of providing a safe space. This approach emerged during European colonialism and remains dominant today. The best example is Kew Gardens in London, where seeds and plant species from around the world are maintained under controlled conditions. In situ initiatives, conservation takes place in the natural environment of the species. Beyond the scientific advantages and disadvantages of this approach, I find it particularly interesting how it allows local communities to become more than mere sources of pollution. In practice, they become part of the project itself, acknowledged rather than ignored or sidelined. This creates a rich exchange between local populations and scientists. The Common Garden initiative in Colombia led me to think of in situ as a potentially different approach to AI development. What if we borrowed the notion of in situ conservation and apply it to the field of AI? With this move, we can consider how, instead of developing AI in distant locations such as Silicon Valley, AI can grow in the very contexts where it will be deployed. In situ approaches can allow AI development and regulation to become exposed to, rather than isolated from, local ecological contexts and struggles, becoming infused with the concerns of local populations. In situ AI, it is important to clarify, is different from participatory AI. Participatory AI can still take place in controlled environments where one or more groups are invited to inform a project, but the project itself may still occur in distant, relatively closed settings. Participatory AI asks important questions such as the actual capacity of different actors to inform AI development. In situ AI, however, asks a different set of questions more concerned on local context and sensitivity to ecological struggles. In situ AI, of course, is not perfect. Indeed, it might reinforce power dynamics, as proximity does not necessarily imply equality. However, I still consider that in situ AI can ensure higher degrees of responsiveness to local ecological context and potentially help balance the pursuit of global ecological imperatives with sensitivity toward local ecological visions and struggles. So to finish, let me recap what I've said. So in recent years, AI for sustainability initiatives have proliferated. While big tech projects have drawn most of the attention, AI is also being used in diverse contexts across the globe, including the Global South, to address local ecological concerns. One risk of such projects is hubris, by which I mean adopting a detached, overconfident stance that claims to be able to predict the future and might sideline the initiative's impact on local context. A potential remedy or an alternative might be in situ AI, which I described as emerging organically among a scientific peasant collaboration in Colombia and which might ensure higher responsiveness to local context. By presenting these two cases, Guacamaya and the Common Garden, I don't want to create binary representations. In fact, looking at them together can raise nuanced questions. One that I'm exploring at the moment is whether it is possible to develop large-scale, ambitious ecological technological initiatives that might be necessary to address the climate crisis, but in a way that follows in situ logics or methodologies. So that's everything from my side, and here are some references in case you are interested. Happy to hear your comments and questions.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Sebastian. I think we already have a question in the chat. So, Beatrice, I see you've shared a question. I wonder if you also want to perhaps unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, happy to. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for your presentation. It gives a very overstanding idea of how these parallels run together when we talk about AI and sustainability. I asked a question from which is quite kind of conceptual, how the idea of in situ, which is related to pluriversality, well, it's a Zapatista principle, but instrumentalized by Arturo Escobar. How does that dialogues with the concept of outer ontologies from Papadoulos, or even cosmopolitics from Isabella Stengers? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good and deep question. So the lens that I adopted for my empirical work usually is an ontological one, right? So I'm really focused on human-nature relations, how these are deployed, how certain forms of relations or visions of nature are imposed, and so on. I think what I'm trying to say here is that in situ kind of approaches or methods, I'm still figuring out what this in situ thing is all about. I'm trying to say that those are kind of better equipped to acknowledge those kind of local forms of engaging with nature, local ontologies, rather than ex situ ones. Yeah, with this, I don't mean that all initiatives need to be in situ, that we don't need ex situ at all. I think that my contribution is not necessarily in the field of conservation biology, but rather how we can introduce some kind of more in situ logics or methods within research or, even environmental struggles and so on, to kind of better acknowledge that kind of rich and unique human nature relations that are always place based, and at the same time for on the side of scientists, for example, or computer scientists even involved in AI projects, I think that it really offers an opportunity for them to understand better the impact of the projects that they're undertaking and the political implications basically for existing environmental struggles. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's potential. Thank you.
We have Naili Kalema. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question? perhaps while we wait for Nai, Oscar has shared a question in the chat. Thank you very much for the talk. Could you expand on the relationship between war, conservation, and AI? Both have very intense developmental paths in the country.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Oscar. Well, the exact relationship between those three things is not something I have really thought about too much. What I mentioned is that what I'm interested is in how all of these AI initiatives are taking place in the midst of kind of some more or less problematic forms of ecological conservation. I refer to the idea of green militarization, through which the military in Colombia has been invited or self-invited to participate in conservation initiatives. In some places, for example, in Sumapaz, in this Páramo, where the military has some projects focused on conservation, which are taking place after some guerrilla groups kind of withdrew from the area. I think my question would be to what extent AI initiatives are kind of acknowledging all of these politics, all of these kind of involvements of different actors and so on. The example I provided also is the one on detection of roads in the Guacamaya project by Microsoft, and how the detection of roads can also involve certain forms of criminalization. I'm not sure, maybe you might know whether the prosecution, if you want, of people building roads is done by the military. But yeah, my question is the extent to which AI projects are actually acknowledging what's going on, or just are actually acknowledging, or just ignoring it and pretending that everything is kind of simple, or maybe that it just works as it would in the global north, where you can detect an illegal road, and eventually there are not the same kind of politics that you can find in Colombia, for example. But I think that's a very interesting question to ask, for sure, about AI and militarization.
Thank you. I'm trying to see if some folks have said they weren't unable to unmute, but hopefully that is possible now. Carolina, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to come in?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Great. Thank you so much. Great presentation. Thank you so much. It was really interesting, and I'm not like in political science traditionally, so it's been really invigorating as well. I'm also from Colombia. I'm currently studying data inequality and society, and so like my question kind of comes from that place. I'm working on participatory methods now, and I'm curious to know your perspective on like this in situ like approach to the work. You mentioned kind of critiquing, exploring, questioning whether this approach of the Fraile Home Project, for example, is participatory, to what degree the campesinos understand the objectives of the project, the value of the project. And so I wanted to kind of ask a little bit more around that, like what is the limit to in situ if it's not kind of providing the community with value, and like what kinds of challenges and opportunities are you seeing there currently in the landscape in general, but also in Colombia, because I'm personally interested.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. So I think there are some kind of epistemological aspects that are a bit more theoretical of like what's valuable about this approach. Maybe I can talk a little bit more from a kind of more pragmatic perspective. I think when the discussion around participatory AI, in my opinion, is sometimes a bit idealistic. Like it doesn't acknowledge how it actually works in practice. So I have worked with local communities, for example, resisting data centers, and I really wish they could think more and develop more on big tech, how they see technology. But in practice, they have so many other issues, other concerns that are, of course, more relevant. So I feel like many participatory AI projects try to kind of, well, this is not me saying it. Actually, there is a very rich tradition in Colombia around participatory methods. But the problem of some participatory approaches is that they end up kind of imposing an agenda, right? So if I go to Sumapaz, this Páramo, and I ask campesinos to refer to AI, what they think about it. It's not really their concern. It's not their main preoccupation. So I think that in situ AI is like a way around that problem, because it will ensure like higher degrees of proximity between those involved in the AI project and the local populations. I also highlighted this kind of ambient sharing thing because I think it's quite important, because he has contributed to build a lot of trust between scientists, computer scientists, and the local communities. So I think it's like a workaround, if you want, to the pragmatics of participatory AI. However, it's not perfect, right? It does have a downside. So proximity doesn't mean equality or horizontality at all. So you can still have, like situations where scientists are considered, as like having a superior type of knowledge and so on. And I did see some kind of forms of that when I was conducting fieldwork. But I do think it's like thinking about AI initiatives more broadly. I wish all of them would incorporate a more kind of in situ logics in practice. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think so. There's definitely more to it there, but I think that's a really robust kind of addressing a lot of things. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And Nai, would you like to go next? And Brendan then maybe.
Yes. Thank you. Sebastian, thank you for the fantastic presentation. I really appreciate it. One of the things that I really liked is this in situ AI. And also, I think in your presentation, you briefly mentioned how the types of capabilities that would develop not only with regard to the people who would come to learn from the people in the campesina, but also from the people themselves. And so my question would be, what are some of the ways that you could see this becoming more embedded? And are there certain types of policy that could help to make that happen? That's it. Thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you, Nai, and thanks for joining. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, to be completely honest, I haven't thought too much about the policy implications of this. I do think that something maybe I would like to do in the future, having identified like there is something special going on here, would be perhaps to think of not national level policies, but for example, in the development plans of local communities or regions, how they can kind of promote a more in situ approach to projects involving technology. Again, this is on the basis that quite often like local communities don't have the time or the availability to completely participate in participatory projects. But to what extent, when there are scientific initiatives involving technology and so on, I'm wondering whether some kind of framework can be built around this so that local communities have like a more organized approach and can favor more in situ rather than ex situ approaches to their ecological challenges. Yeah, sorry that I'm not sure about the implications of this for policy, but this is something that, Nai, I'm happy to talk to you at some point if we meet in London one day, because I know that I know Nai from London.
That's really nice. Brendan, would you like to come in next?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sebastian. Such an interesting presentation and relevant to all sorts of structural challenges like poverty, which is where I'm coming from an international point of development point of view. And the participatory development has been long critiqued as a kind of a new tyranny. So really interesting to see the parallels and what you were talking about. I was thinking about the way that sort of technologically driven approaches in development have tended to depoliticize and sort of curtail local contestation. And I guess that seems to be a risk of even in situ AI development. And you sort of talked about that in terms of the epistemological, the risks. Basically, it's a bit of a naive question, but how far does the material and proprietary dimensions of the technologies of AI actually allow for sort of meaningful in situ work, meaningful engagement?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. Can I ask you what do you mean by the material dimension of AI? Because yeah, it can mean different things for different people. So can
Yeah,
you explain that a bit more?
I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure. I have a really solid grip on it, but it would be the technological infrastructure, the resourcing, the sort of material equipment that you require to make it work in a useful fashion in a given intervention or programming. I'm keeping it quite broad because I'm not entirely sure how it would work.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, my previous research was quite focused on the material aspect of AI. I looked at energy and water use by data centers and mineral extraction with a focus in Chile in particular. But but in this kind of project in particular, I didn't want to focus too much on that. However, because I wanted to ask more about like the ecological vision underpinning it. However, what's interesting about the Common Garden project is that all the AI tools and software and hardware that they're using is owned by the University of Bogota. So and it's open source, so they're not using any kind of proprietary cloud system or anything. However, that's only possible because the project is quite small scale. So the amount of data that they're collecting from the plants, from all these images that they're taking and so on, is very small. So they can afford to have more kind of local infrastructure. However, if you think of more ambitious projects where there is more and more data, a different solution might be needed, and more kind of questions will emerge, right, around like what cloud system to use. And at least actually the computer scientist involved in this project told me that he thought that in Colombia at least there was no kind of computing power to carry out like more ambitious ecological project, like besides the corporate options that exist. So I would say kind of for this project, for the Common Garden project in particular, the material politics were kind of pretty much not solved, but were not a big issue because they were not relying on corporate big data centers and so on. But I think it does introduce the question of scale, right? What happens if projects like this want to expand or want to scale up? How are they going to deal with, the kind of infrastructure issues and eventually value chain and so on? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I thought about it. Wait.
And Tanya?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for the talk. I really enjoyed it. I'm Tanya. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto. And I really enjoyed your talk. And I think, I mean, I'm just kind of, it might be like a naive or like a very kind of simple question, but I'm really curious about your thoughts on like, what are things we should be aware of as researchers or as people who do ethnography or very like embedded work within the community, to like what are the things that we should look for when we're like doing or like practicing this sort of in situ AI design, or like what would success look like for you and the way that you've thought about it in this particular process. Um, like just kind of what are things we should be aware of? When do we know that we're on the right track? Like I'm very curious like about your thoughts on that. Um,
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. It's a big question. I think it's kind of been present in my academic career throughout because I usually work with local communities either in Chile or Colombia. Um, I actually published an article on reflexivity in critical data studies where I really wanted to kind of bring together my thoughts on this topic, on the politics of ethnographic or even participatory research. I would say, if because we're academics and in the social sciences in particular, I guess many of us share like a more or less critical approach to these kind of topics, and usually something that I've seen is that sometimes we just cite literature, decolonial feminist literature, what you have political ecology that is quite critical, but don't necessarily engage with the origins of those theories and concepts. Best example is extractivism. So many people talk about extractivism in the value chain of AI in relation to labor, to material resources. But extractivism is really a concept that, came from activism to a great extent. So the question would be, to what extent in, reformulating these concepts within academia, we are making them more complicated than they are and actually disempowering communities to formulate their own critique. Same with ethnographic research, when you just go to a place like a community affected by a data center, you ask them to, spend hours of interviews, different community members, and then you just go back to academia, publish an article, get an academic promotion or a position, but the community is basically in the same situation. I think that's kind of a form of extractivism that we can do as academics, and perhaps a more in situ approach will help us kind of acknowledge that we need to spend more time understanding how we can also help the communities that we're working with. Although in the article I mainly talk about reflexivity, which is another step. If you're asking this question, I think you already have some degree of reflexivity on your own, but it's not easy, and I've been dealing with this for a long time. So as I said in my previous project, I engage with data center activists. At the moment, I am collaborating with them, with this community in Santiago, in setting up a global network of data center activists, communities, researchers, and journalists called the Just Cloud Network. And it doesn't have like a research purpose. It's more like if you want to call it in academia, it's a horrible term, but research impact, if you want. But yeah, that's brought out several problems, not problems, but ethical challenges around my participation in that network, right? Like, and so on and so forth. But yeah, happy to discuss further, but I think it's a very big question, and it's good that you're asking that at the right moment.
Thank you, Sebastian. I really appreciate the response around reflexivity, and yeah, I just really appreciate the research as well. Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you, Tanya. Juan, do you want to come in next?
Hello. I'm Juan from Manila. I'm from Sigla Research Center based in Manila. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say that this is an approach that is really interesting and something that I'd like to read up more and possibly absorb. Because so in the Philippines, we recently entered the Pax Silica Alliance with the US. So we're expecting a lot of like upswell in terms of AI interventions, especially data centers. So like a lot of the discussions that you've raised here are really relevant to us. And yeah, I just wanted to say that I want to like think about how we can also apply this approach in the Philippines, especially since there's a lot of greenwashing already that's happening. So yeah, thank you for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, and yeah, nice to hear that this resonates to some extent with the context in the Philippines too. And thank you for joining.
Fantastic. Maybe there's a small follow-up question in the chat. This is, I think, coming from building on your response to the question about materiality and proprietary dimensions of AI, where Carolina asks, sorry. Yeah, she asks, do you happen to know who owns the data in the Common Garden case? Is it or perhaps it's across the two cases? She asks if it's Microsoft or the Colombian government, campesinos or the university. And there's also one last question in the chat, where Lena Tensik asks, would love to learn more about the Just Cloud network as well, if possible. So if you could say a little bit about that. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, when it comes to data ownership, in the case of Guacamaya, it's not clear. So I mainly worked with available documentation, and there's a reason for that, and that's because I tried to get in touch with people from Microsoft, but they didn't want to talk to me. So I had to rely on available information. I have the impression, or I'm sure that many of the data that they're using is already available. So the work that Microsoft is doing is to bring together different data sources, and in that they have partnered with local institutions and put them, use like AI to create like this generative tool to which you could eventually ask questions such as, when was the last time that this parrot was heard? So it will give you, like an answer to your question. But I'm not sure what will happen with that data. Even if, for example, if goes into the Microsoft cloud, whether cloud could claim some kind of ownership over it, I'm not sure. But it's something that actually could be looked at further, because you can also ask public institutions what's kind of the agreement in that sense. In the case of the campesinos, I think the data mainly belongs to researchers, in this case to Ivan, who is the lead scientist, who is based at the Missouri Botanical Gardens, and also to other partners based in different universities in Colombia. I don't think that campesinos have ownership over the data, but I would also ask, I think that's more like a governance question on how could campesinos exercise some form of sovereignty over that data, because just giving them ownership wouldn't solve the problem. That you would also require like a more robust governance system through which they can do something with the data, or kind of, but that's a very good question. And the other one about the Just Cloud Network, thank you, Lina, for that question. So basically, I met in 2022, I started my research on data centers, and I met this group from Santiago who managed to stall the construction of a Google data center in 2024. They had they fought for years, and finally they kind of managed to reach that outcome through legal initiatives and a combination of activism and different kind of strategies. But yeah, now they are trying to, throughout this process, they met different communities from different countries having similar issues. So they're kind of trying to set up a more global initiative. Everything is kind of under discussion at the moment. And one thing that has come up a lot is that, being an environmental activist in Latin America is not easy, is not safe. It's kind of it's the region with the most kind of human rights issues with regards to environmental activists. So who exactly is part of the network and everything at the moment is anonymous, because they have to ensure the safety of the members. But yeah, we're working on a set of webinars that I hope I'm going to be promoting soon. But yeah, at the moment, there is no formal way of being a member or anything, because we're figuring out that, in conjunction with groups from, from 5 to 7 countries. The other thing is that this network is in Spanish, because that's the language that they speak in Chile. And maybe the second language is going to be English. We're trying to find support to do these webinars bilingual, so we will have live translation. But I really love the fact that this network started in Santiago. So even though I'm contributing as an academic, I'm doing as much as I can to not transform London, where I'm based, at the center of it, which most kind of financial support will kind of try to do directly or indirectly. But yeah, happy to, Lina, to talk further about this if you're interested. It will be.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I think with that, we've just crossed the hour as well. I want to say thank you so much, Sebastian, for sharing this fantastic work, and also for everyone for the very enriching discussion. I hope the conversation's also feeding into the work as you develop this further, and looking forward to sort of continuing these conversations over other avenues as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I got very good ideas and questions, so I'm definitely gonna be thinking through them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.